You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got major breaking news here out of the U.S. Supreme Court. All eyes have been on this case regarding the Trump administration wrongly deporting Abrego Garcia to El Salvador. The Trump administration itself conceded that it was an administrative error. And so we've been waiting to see what would happen. The Supreme Court has weighed in. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, a little bit of life was just breathed back into the rule of law by the Supreme Court. They ordered the Trump administration to return Abrego Garcia to the United States pronto. They didn't use the word pronto. That's my interpretation. But a lower court judge had ruled that, listen, the Trump administration not only wrongfully deported Mr. Garcia, violating his constitutional due process rights of notice and opportunity to be heard, but they also did it in violation of a federal court order issued back in 2019 prohibiting the United States government from deporting Mr. Garcia to El Salvador, precisely where they sent him. And not only to El Salvador, but to a notoriously dangerous prison in El Salvador. Now, our viewers may remember just a day or two ago, Chief Justice John Roberts put an administrative stay on that lower court order to return Mr. Garcia right away, but they just lifted that stay and they basically affirmed the lower court's order and they directed the Trump administration to return Mr. Garcia to the United States. I do want to flag for our viewers one thing that's a little bit of a curiosity, and now the case is going to be sent back down to the trial court judge to address this curiosity. The trial court judge ordered the Trump administration to, quote, facilitate and effectuate the return of Abrego Garcia to the United States. And the Chief Justice observed in this very short 4-page opinion that the order properly required the Trump administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been handled had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador. But he says that the scope of the term effectuate in the district court's order is, however, unclear, and the district court needs to clarify what it meant by effectuate without sort of unduly interfering in the executive branch's power and authority to engage in foreign affairs. All of that sounds like legal mumbo-jumbo, even to somebody who has lived a life of legal mumbo-jumbo like me for 30 years. So I don't think that's going to be a major hang-up. The important takeaway from this Supreme Court ruling is that when the Trump administration essentially said, we made a mistake and we don't care, we're not bringing him back, they went so far as to say in court, it's impossible for us to bring him back from El Salvador, which is effing laughable,
right?
Quite frankly. The Supreme Court just called them out on it and said, no, you will bring Mr. Garcia back. That is a victory for the rule of law and for the constitutional due process guarantee found in the Fifth Amendment.
Now, I just want to flag here that we are in a moment where if the administration opts not to comply with the Supreme Court, then this could be at least the legal-based constitutional crisis that we've been discussing. I would maintain that we're very clearly in a constitutional crisis right now just by virtue of the ways in which this administration is weaponizing the federal government against its political opponents and just more broadly abusing the government on Donald Trump's behalf. But right here would be the first instance where the Trump administration does have the opportunity to overtly defy a Supreme Court ruling if they opt not to comply. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is right, Brian. And I am loath to predict what the Trump administration might do in the face of a court order that Donald Trump really doesn't like. But I'm going to venture a guess that when they directly say, you admitted you were wrong, you not only violated this man's due process rights, but you defied a lawfully entered federal court order that he not be deported to El Salvador. I don't think this is the court order that the Trump administration is going to want to defy.
Yeah.
But it does become a challenge. And here's why, Brian. Because if all of this was happening domestically, for example, if Mr. Garcia wasn't deported to El Salvador, but he was being held somewhere in a federal prison facility somewhere in the United States, then the law would say that the United States Marshal Service shall enforce all federal court orders. However, that gets very dicey when somebody is being held in a foreign country. It really complicates matters. So I just don't think this is the hill that they're going to want to die on. But look, it is the Trump administration. They are lawless. Trump has largely been acting more like a mob boss than a president, signing unconstitutional executive orders one after another out of the Oval Office. So I have a feeling we're going to know right quick whether the Trump administration is ready to sort of, really launch a full-blown constitutional crisis and defy the lawful authority of a co-equal branch of government, the judiciary.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think that this is going to be the hill that they opt to die on, because I think that there's going to be other cases that they want to expend more of their political capital on. But at the same time, I could see a rationale for them opting to dig in here, because they have made immigration a cornerstone of this administration. That was a big reason, in part, why Trump won in November of 2024. And so if he's able to dig in here and prove himself the victor in a scenario where he can just opt to deport people without any due process to any country, anywhere, anytime he wants, regardless of the facts, and he's successful, then that will embolden him to know that there's no guardrails on the one issue that he benefits from most. So there is a rationale for him to want to do it, although I would tend to agree with you just by going with my gut here that this is not going to be where they opt to defy the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, and I have a feeling, let me look for the point of light here, dim though it may be. First of all, the Supreme Court did the right thing by the Constitution and by Mr. Garcia. But the other thing is, if Donald Trump directly defies an order from the Supreme Court to bring someone back that they admit they unlawfully deported, I think Donald Trump may permanently lose all hope that the Supreme Court will rule in his favor in the future, because they granted him absolute presidential immunity. But you know what? They granted it, and they can revoke it. They can revisit it. And if this administration and this president defies this Supreme Court order, I have a feeling Donald Trump will have more problems on his hands than he may remedy by not bringing Mr. Garcia back.
Glenn, is there any indication as to how quickly the Trump administration is being forced to move here?
There's no indication, but I think that the tenor of this opinion is we're remanding it to the trial court just to clear up what it meant by effectuate. Facilitate was okay. They didn't like the word effectuate.
Yeah.
And then I have a feeling, because, the original deadline that the trial court judge set was 11:59 p.m. on Monday, the Supreme Court opinion was careful to note, okay, that deadline has passed, but in all other effects, that court order remains something that the government must abide by. So I think the tone, the tenor, the atmospherics of this opinion suggests that this thing better not linger 1 minute longer than it needs to.
I mean, if it's being remanded back to the trial court to figure out some of the intricacies here, presumably the trial court would say, okay, let's figure out what effectuate means, and then here's a new deadline by which this has to be done.
Yeah, I think the trial court judge would be wise to set another deadline, and I don't think the Supreme Court will look kindly on more sort of unnecessary delay by the Trump administration.
Now, Glenn, I know that we have spoken about other cases in which the Trump administration has sought to deport people without due process. Does this have any impact on those other cases?
Yeah, I love that question, because I've been trying to think through the implications of it. Because remember, in the case it was being handled by Judge Boasberg involving 200 to 300, a mass deportation of Venezuelan immigrants to that same prison in El Salvador, and they all had their due process rights violated. I wonder if this isn't sort of going to set a tone that will be helpful in that litigation and may result in the Supreme Court being willing to say, you know what, we've got another 200 to 300 folks who are in a comparable situation to Mr. Garcia, but let me hasten to add, they're not in an identical situation to Mr. Garcia, because what Garcia had the benefit of that those other wrongly deported, unconstitutionally deported Venezuelan immigrants don't have the benefit of, it is that prior court order directing that the United States government not deport those other immigrants to Venezuela. So something of a mixed bag, but I do think this will forward the constitutional and the due process and the deportation ball at least a couple of yards in connection with the other pending cases.
And I think it's worth, just for our audience here, taking a step back and looking at this from a 30,000-foot view, because I know that we adapt to everything that happens and everything feels a little bit more normalized on a daily basis, but I want to make sure, I want to caution against normalizing the insanity of what we are seeing right now. His administration went in court and admitted, somebody from the DOJ said that this was an administrative error by which we decided to send a legal resident in the U.S. to a foreign gulag. And rather than doing anything to return them, they were just like, no, we're just going to leave them there. It was our mistake that this guy got sent there, but also we just don't care that we can just disappear somebody into a foreign country's maximum security prison. And it needed to go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court to say, no, you can't disappear somebody with no due process to a foreign prison. Yes, you have to bring him back. And the fact that this was even a fight, the fact that we're even having this conversation, the fact that this is happening in the United States of America is so backwards and so insane. And if this stuff wasn't being normalized by Trump's lunacy on a daily basis, if you had just dropped us into this moment from 5 years ago to a point where the president of the United States is straight up just disappearing somebody because his name is Hispanic and his skin is brown, you would lose your mind. We would all be apoplectic. And so I don't want to lose the forest through the trees here. And the fact that we see this stuff on a daily basis, I don't want us to become immune to just how utterly absurd and dangerous this is. And look, I'm glad that we saw this ruling here today. And as we had just discussed, there is the possibility that the Trump administration could opt to defy this court order, and we can just descend further into the constitutional crisis that we're already in. But you know, it really is a really sad commentary on the state of affairs in the United States of America, that this shining city on a hill, this country for which law and order is supposed to reign supreme, especially under a political party that beats its chest as the party of law and order, is just so far through the looking glass that it's important we take instances to just try and resettle ourselves to where we are. But really, again, a sad commentary on where we are right now.
Yeah, Brian, and I'm glad you raised that, because think about the federal government saying, we were wrong, this was in violation of a court order, and then they stood fast on their illegality and their unconstitutionality, declaring we're not bringing him back, going so far as to saying it's literally impossible, not possible. That's a quote from what a DOJ attorney said to a judge in resisting, the need to bring this man back. And here's one other thing. I want to plant this seed in the minds of our viewers, because I hope at some point it grows and bears fruit. When the DOJ said this was a, quote, administrative error, that claim has not been tested in the crucible of a trial. That was simply spit out, both in pleadings and in open court. But I am not prepared to accept the Trump administration's word that this was an administrative error. I wouldn't be surprised if this was an intentional play by the Trump administration to see how far they could push the sort of lawless and unconstitutional envelope. Maybe we'll get an answer to that moving forward, but let's not credit administrative error just because a DOJ attorney spit it out in trying to defend this conduct.
Right. Talk about a sad commentary on the state of things right now. When administrative error, which would be bad enough unto itself, disqualifying enough unto itself, that they accidentally sent somebody to a foreign gulag, when even that is unbelievable, and when the reality is more likely that they just sent him over there because why the hell not? Because they view themselves as lawless. That really goes to show what this administration is about. So look, we will of course stay on top of this to see what happens next, how quickly he's supposed to be returned, and whether or not the Trump administration opts to comply. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, this is a major story. Highly recommend that you subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.